call came on a Thursday evening just after 7. She was in the kitchen, still in her work clothes, pulling a pan off the stove. The number on the screen was Joel Price, Susannah's husband. She almost let it ring out. He was apologizing before she'd even said hello. She listened without moving. The pan stayed in her hand. He told her he'd found a phone bill. Not one call, not a handful. Hundreds, going back 14 months, all between Tim and Susannah. The pan went down on the bench. She doesn't remember setting it there. Here's the thing about Joel Price. He was not a dramatic man. He coached his son's football team on Saturday mornings. He made his own pasta. He was the kind of person you forgot was in the room until you needed him. So when his voice broke on the other end of that call, Claire understood very clearly that he was not overreacting. She thanked him. She told him she'd call him back. She hung up. This was the woman who had driven 40 minutes in the rain to sit with Claire the night her father stopped recognizing her. No call ahead, just headlights in the driveway and a quiet knock on the door. That was Susannah. Claire stood in her kitchen in Norwood and felt something go completely still inside her. Not shock, not grief, just stillness. The kind that sits beneath both of those things. She wasn't crying. That frightened her more than anything, Joel had said. She didn't confront Tim that night. He came home at 7:45, dropped his keys on the hall table the way he always did, and asked what was for dinner. She told him. He said, "Great." He poured himself a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table and talked about a meeting that had run long. She listened. She nodded. She put food in front of him. The whole time, one part of her brain was completely separate from the conversation, cold and quiet and working through something she couldn't yet name. She watched his hands, the way he held his fork, the way he looked at his phone once and set it face down without checking it. She'd seen him do that 1,000 times. She'd never thought anything of it. She thought something of it now. After dinner, she washed up, and he watched television. In the evening passed the way their evenings always passed. Two people in the same house, moving around each other with a kind of practiced ease that she'd long since stopped questioning. She told herself that was maturity. That was what 18 years looked like. At 9 o'clock, she picked up her phone and texted Susannah. "You around tomorrow?" The reply came in under 4 minutes. "Always. Coffee at 10? Claire read it twice. Then she set her phone face down on the nightstand, the same way Tim had done earlier, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. She didn't sleep for a long time, and she still wasn't crying. She and Susannah had met at 25 in a yoga class in the city. That was the short version, the version Claire had told at dinner parties and birthday speeches, and once, memorably, at Susannah's 40th, to a room full of people who already knew it. The longer version was harder to summarize, because the longer version was just 18 years of a life lived alongside another person. It was Susannah who had talked her down the night before her wedding, not with advice, just with presence. Sitting on the edge of a hotel bed at midnight, legs crossed, eating crackers from the minibar, saying nothing particularly useful, but staying until Claire could breathe again. It was Susannah who had showed up at the hospital the morning Maya was born, before Claire's own mother had arrived, holding coffee she couldn't drink and crying in a way Claire found absurd and completely perfect. When Claire's father got sick, the long, slow kind of sick that hollows a family out over years, it was Susannah who called every Sunday, not to ask how he was. She knew how he was. She called to ask how Claire was. There's a difference. Most people don't make it. And when the marriage started cooling 4 years ago, that quiet withdrawal that Claire couldn't quite locate or name, it was Susannah who sat across from her and said that this was normal, that long marriages breathed in and out. That distance didn't mean damage. Claire had believed her. Why wouldn't she? Susannah had given her no reason in 18 years to look for one. That was the whole problem. She started with 18 months ago. That fell at the right place. Tim had told her he was at a work dinner in the city. A client thing. She remembered, because she'd asked if she should wait up, and he'd said, "Don't bother. It'll run late." She hadn't bothered. She'd fallen asleep on the couch with a book and woken up when she heard his key in the door just after midnight. She hadn't thought anything of it. He had work dinners. That was part of his life. That was part of their arrangement. But now she was thinking about what Susannah had texted her that same evening. Just after 6. Absolutely wrecked. Early night for me. Speak tomorrow. Claire had replied with a heart. She'd been glad, actually. Glad that Susannah wasn't up for talking that night, because she hadn't been either. She'd thought nothing of it. Two tired women in their 40s on a Wednesday evening. She lay in the dark now and held those two things next to each other. Tim in the city. Susannah going to bed early. On the same night, she ran back through her memory looking for a second one. It didn't take long. A Saturday afternoon, 6 months later, Tim playing golf with a colleague, Susannah visiting her sister interstate, both of them unreachable in the same window of the same afternoon. Claire had spent that Saturday alone, which she hadn't minded at all. She minded it now. She found a third before she even looked for it. 3 years ago, Claire had sat across from Susannah at their usual cafe on King William Road and told her something felt wrong. Not wrong in a dramatic way. Wrong in the way a room feels when a window's been left open somewhere. You can't see it. You can't find it. But there's a chill that shouldn't be there. She'd told Susannah that Tim was distant, that he was sometimes unreachable in the evenings, that she'd asked him once where he'd been, and something about his answer had sat oddly with her. Susannah had listened the way she always listened. Fully, quietly, with her hands wrapped around her cup, and then she'd said something that Claire had carried with her for 3 years, as though it were wisdom. She'd said that Claire had always been this way, that grief did something particular to anxious people. It made them scan for the next loss before the current one had even settled. Her father's illness had changed her nervous system, Susannah said. It had made her hypervigilant in her closest relationships. Tim wasn't pulling away. Claire was bracing for something that wasn't coming. It was so gently said, so thoroughly convincing. Claire had brought it up in therapy the following month, framed it exactly that way. Her therapist had nodded and said it was worth exploring. She'd spent 6 months exploring it, working on herself, adjusting her own perception. Susannah had watched her do all of that, had probably suggested the therapist. Claire lay in the dark and felt the shape of it fully for the first time. The doubt had never belonged to her. It had been placed there. She didn't sleep. By 2 in the morning, she'd stopped trying. She got up quietly, went to the kitchen, and sat down at the table with a notepad and a pen. Not her phone, a pen. She didn't want anything. She wrote to exist anywhere. It could be found or explained away. She started with the dates she already had and worked outward from there. The work dinner, the early night, the Saturday afternoon with the golf and the sister interstate. She wrote them down in 2 columns, Tim and Susannah, and looked at the alignment. Then she kept going. A long weekend retreat Susannah had suggested 14 months ago. Out of nowhere, really. She'd sent Claire a link on a Monday and said it was exactly what she needed. 3 days, a spa, no phones. Claire had gone. She'd come home lighter and grateful and told Susannah it had been exactly right. Tim had been at a conference that same weekend. She'd been glad they both had something on. She wrote it down. Then a Sunday lunch Susannah had organized at her place. The whole afternoon, 4 couples stretched into the evening. Claire had driven. Tim had said he'd get a lift and meet her there. He'd arrived an hour and a half late. Susannah had covered for him immediately, warmly, before Claire could say a word. He texted me. He got caught up, you know how he is. She wrote that down too. She counted 6 occasions before she put the pen down. 6 that she could verify from memory alone. She didn't want to know how many she'd already forgotten. She was parked outside the cafe on King William Road at 9:53. Susannah's car was already there. She could see it from where she pulled in. The white hatchback, slightly dusty, a reusable bag on the back seat the way there always was. Everything exactly as it always was. Claire sat with the engine off and didn't move. Part of her wanted to walk in and watch Susannah's face. Not to confront her, just to look at her with new eyes and see what 18 years of friendship looked like from the other side of what she now knew. Whether the warmth was still the warmth, whether she could tell the difference, the other part of her wanted to start the car and drive somewhere without a name and not come back until she'd figured out which version of the last 18 years was real. Because here was the thing she couldn't get past. Susannah hadn't just been her friend. Susannah had been the person she checked herself against when she felt too anxious, too demanding, too much. It was Susannah's voice she heard telling her she was fine. When she doubted her marriage, her parenting, her own judgment. Susannah was the one who recalibrated her. If that was a construction, then every moment of steadiness she'd found inside it was borrowed from a lie. She thought about Maya, saying Susannah watched her dad instead of paying attention to her. She told her daughter she was being unfair. She sat with that for a moment. Then she got out of the car and walked inside. Susannah was already at their usual table, facing the door, the way she always sat. She stood up when Claire walked in and hugged her the way she always hugged her. Both arms, a real one, not a shoulder lean. Claire hugged her back. She didn't know what else to do. They sat down, ordered. The coffee came. Susannah asked about Maya's upcoming birthday dinner, asked about a work project Claire had mentioned the week before, asked whether Claire had finally called the plumber about the laundry. All of it warm, all of it present, all of it Susannah. Claire listened and responded and smiled in the right places. Then she set her cup down and said, very casually, that Joel had called her last night. She wasn't looking at the table when she said it. She was looking directly at Susannah. What she saw lasted less than a second. It wasn't guilt. Guilt she might have expected, might have recognized. What she saw was something quieter and more precise, a half-second of calculation, moving fast behind Susannah's eyes, immediately replaced by an expression of warm concern. Susannah leaned forward. She asked if Joel was all right, whether everything was okay between them, whether there was something Claire could do. It was a perfectly shaped response, considered, caring, exactly what a best friend would say, but it arrived too fast, and it was too complete. Not a person reacting, a person landing. Claire had known this woman for 18 years. She nodded slowly and watched Susannah perform concern for another 40 minutes. She didn't say another word about Joel. She called Joel back from her car before she'd left the car park. He was steadier than the night before, the kind of steady that comes not from feeling better, but from having already passed through the worst of it, and come out the other side numb. He'd spent the morning going through Susannah's phone, deleted threads, partially recovered through a backup she hadn't cleared. The picture they formed was not 14 months, 38 months. Claire sat with that number for a moment. 38 months ago, she was 40. Maya was 13. Tim had surprised her with a weekend away for her birthday. Just the two of them. A place down on the Fluyo Peninsula. Long walks and good wine and the feeling that maybe things were shifting back towards something. She'd come home from that weekend and told Susannah it had been exactly what they needed. She wrote that down when she got home, added it to the notepad. Didn't let herself feel it yet. Not yet. She kept working, methodically, moving to the last 3 years the way you move through a house after a flood, room by room, assessing what's damaged, not stopping to grieve it, just recording what's gone. By mid-afternoon, she had 2 pages, dates, Gaps, redirections, moments where Susannah had appeared helpfully and warmly at exactly the right time to keep Claire's attention exactly where it needed to be. She didn't call Tim. She didn't call Susannah back. She needed the full shape of it before she gave either of them the chance to manage her again. She turned to page 3 and kept writing. Maya came home at 4:15, dropped her bag in the hall, and appeared in the kitchen doorway looking for food. Claire closed the notepad. They stood together at the bench for a few minutes, Maya eating crackers and talking about something that had happened at school. A falling out between two friends. The particular social mechanics of it, who had said what to whom. Claire listened and asked the right questions, and felt, for a few minutes, almost normal. Then Maya asked if Susannah was coming to her birthday dinner next week. Claire said she wasn't sure yet. Maya was quiet for a moment. Then she said she'd actually be fine either way. That Susannah sometimes made her feel like a supporting character at her own table. She said it lightly, the way teenagers say things that are more perceptive than they intend. Claire looked at her daughter. She remembered the first time Maya had said something like that, months ago, sitting in the back seat of the car after a Sunday lunch, saying that Susannah always seemed to be watching Dad instead of paying attention to anyone else. Claire had told her she was being uncharitable. That Susannah loved their whole family. She defended her. She sat with that now, and something in her chest went very quiet. And then, just for a moment, the doubt crept in from the other direction. Maybe she was building something out of coincidence. Phone records and aligned dates and a half-second expression that could have meant anything. Maybe grief made people find patterns that weren't there. Susannah had told her that once. The thought collapsed before it finished forming. Joel sent the photograph at 8 o'clock that evening. No message with it, just the image. Claire understood why he hadn't been able to describe it. Some things resist description until you've seen them yourself. It wasn't a stolen photo, not a candid taken from a distance, blurred and incidental. It was a portrait. Tim was looking directly into the camera, relaxed in a way that takes ease and familiarity to produce. His shoulders were down. His jaw was unclenched. He was smiling, not the careful, composed smile he wore in family photos, but the other one, the unguarded one. Claire hadn't seen that smile in years. She didn't know exactly when she'd stopped seeing it. That was the part that stayed with her. Not the photograph itself, but the realization that its absence had become so normal she'd stopped noticing. She put the phone down and picked it back up and put it down again. Then she called Joel. He told her something he hadn't mentioned the night before, that Susannah had spoken to a mutual friend, a woman named Bridget, someone Claire knew by name but not well, and told her she was finally building towards something real. That she'd been patient, that it was nearly time. Claire sat very still. This wasn't a secret maintained out of guilt or confusion, or the messy emotional arithmetic of an affair. Susannah had a plan, a timeline, a sense of nearly. Claire's marriage wasn't the wreckage of something that had gone wrong. It was a structure someone had been quietly dismantling from the inside. Then Joel said, "There's something else. The book." She knew exactly which book he meant before he finished the sentence. A hardback, dark green cover, the novel Susannah had pressed into her hands at her 41st birthday dinner. Holding it with both hands the way you hold something you want the other person to understand is important. She'd said Claire would love it. She'd said it was one of those books that stays with you. Claire had put it on her nightstand, then on the shelf, then in the spare room with the other things she intended to get to. She found it in 11 minutes. Inside the back cover, folded twice, was a letter. 3 pages, Susannah's handwriting, the particular neat slope of it that Claire would have recognized anywhere. It began, "I've started this 11 times. She read it standing in the hallway. She didn't sit down. She didn't think about sitting down. It was everything. The full timeline. How it started. A work event. One conversation. Then another. Then something neither of them stepped back from. the guilt that she carried and managed, and eventually learned to set down, the way she told herself that Claire's marriage was already over before she arrived in it. That she hadn't caused the distance, she'd simply moved into it. There were 2 lines near the end that Claire read 3 times. Susannah had written that she'd wanted to tell her. That she'd written this letter and 6 others like it, that she'd never sent any of them because she couldn't find a version that didn't destroy everything. She folded it back exactly as it was. She walked to the kitchen table and set it down and stood in her own house, feeling like a stranger in it. ACT 13. Psychological collapse. She didn't call anyone. Tim was in the living room. She could hear the television, the sound of it, ordinary, domestic, completely unchanged, felt obscene in a way she couldn't articulate. She stood at the kitchen table and looked at the letter and didn't move for a long time. Then she sat down, and she started going back, not through dates this time, not through a notepad, through the texture of 18 years of friendship. The specific grain of it, all the moments she'd held on to as evidence of something real. The hotel room the night before her wedding, Susannah on the edge of the bed, eating crackers, staying until Claire could breathe. Had that been real? It felt real. It had always felt like one of the truest things she owned. She didn't know anymore. That was the part that undid her, not the affair. The affair was Tim's failure as much as Susannah's, not the planning, not the photograph, not even the letter sitting open in front of her. What undid her was the not knowing, the sudden inability to trust her own memory of her own life, every reassurance Susannah had ever given her about her marriage. Every night she'd cried on the phone and felt better afterward. Every time she'd been gently redirected back toward herself when she'd started looking outward. Had any of it been friendship? Or had it always been management? She sat with the worst version of that question for a long time. Then, very quietly, she realized something that surprised her. Her grief for Susannah was already larger than her grief for Tim. That realization sat in her chest like a stone she hadn't known she'd been carrying. She told Tim to leave on a Saturday morning. She didn't do it with anger. She didn't present the evidence or walk him through the timeline or ask him to explain the photograph. She simply told him in the kitchen while the coffee was still brewing that she knew, that she'd known for 2 days, and that she needed him to pack a bag and go stay somewhere else while she worked out what came next. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He stood there for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not guilt, not relief, something more complicated than either. And then he went upstairs and she heard drawers opening and closing, and 15 minutes later the front door. The not arguing told her everything the last 3 years hadn't. She called a solicitor on Monday. The woman was brisk and practical and used words like asset division and primary residence in a tone that made it clear she'd had this conversation many times before. Claire found it steadying. Oddly, the bureaucracy of it. The fact that there was a process. That evening, Susannah called. She didn't know Tim had left. She didn't know about the letter. Her voice was warm and familiar, asking how the week had been, mentioning something funny Maya had done at her birthday dinner the previous year. Completely ordinary. A best friend checking in. Claire sat on the back step and listened to all of it. Then she said she had to go and hung up. She sat outside for a while after that, in the cool of the evening. She felt almost nothing, and she wasn't sure if that was damage or the beginning of something else. Susannah called 3 more times that week. Claire let them all go to voicemail. She didn't listen to the messages. She wasn't ready to hear the voice, and she wasn't ready to delete them either, so she left them there, unplayed, unresolved, sitting in her phone like everything else she hadn't yet decided what to do with. Joel filed for divorce. Word got back to Claire through a mutual friend, not through Susannah. She noticed that. The fact that Susannah hadn't called to tell her, the fact that even now, the instinct was to manage the information rather than share it. Old habits, Maya noticed a change in the house the way teenagers notice everything. Sideways, without looking directly at it. She didn't ask about Tim. She didn't ask about Susannah. She just started coming home a little earlier, sitting in the kitchen while Claire cooked instead of disappearing to her room. Small adjustments, the kind of care that doesn't announce itself. One evening she sat down beside Claire on the couch and said she was sorry she hadn't said something sooner. About Susannah, about the way things had felt. Claire looked at her daughter and told her she hadn't known sooner either. They sat there for a long time without the television on, just the sound of the neighborhood outside. Someone's sprinkler, a dog 2 doors down. The ordinary texture of a life that was still, despite everything, intact. The letter stayed on the kitchen table for 11 days. She picked it up sometimes, read a line or two, put it back down. She wasn't sure what she was waiting for, an answer it didn't contain maybe, or the feeling that she'd absorbed it fully enough to let it go. On the 12th day, she put it in a drawer, not because she'd forgiven it, not because the wound had closed or the questions had been answered, or the 18 years had resolved themselves into something she could carry cleanly, because she'd decided it didn't get to live on her table anymore. The drawer closed. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the last of the afternoon light was sitting low over the rooftops of Norwood, warm and indifferent, the way light always is. Some people don't deserve your confrontation. They just deserve your silence.